Elven Watchtower of Eternal Spring. The Whispering Woods were ancient long before memory could measure time. Cloaked in perpetual twilight, the forest seemed alive, its presence palpable in every rustle of leaves and whisper of wind. For centuries, it had guarded its secrets jealously, allowing no mortal to traverse its depths without its blessing or its curse. The elves, wise in their ways, avoided its heart, for they knew the woods were not merely a place, but a power. At the core of this enigmatic realm stood the Watchtower of Eternal Spring, veiled in myth. Tales spoke of its walls, woven with the magic of ancient runes and its power to grant perpetual renewal. Yet, no one who ventured to find the tower returned. The forest ensured that its sacred charge remained unspoiled. Sylna, the forest's guardian, moved through its emerald expanse with a grace that belied the weight of her duty. As a nymph, she was bound to the woods, her life entwined with its essence. Her luminous form shimmered faintly in the dim light, her skin tinged with the green of new leaves, her hair cascading like a waterfall of golden moss. Sylna's heart bore the quiet resignation of one who had lived countless lifetimes, her days spent tending to the forest and protecting the tower from those who would seek its power. That evening, the woods stirred with unease, a ripple of something foreign breaking the harmony. Sylna paused in her vigil, attuned to the forest's voice, a chorus of whispers carried on the wind. An intruder, the woods seemed to say, the words not spoken but felt, vibrating through the roots and leaves. Sylna's lips pressed into a thin line as she closed her eyes, attuning herself to the disturbance. She saw it then, a figure moving with deliberate purpose, their steps firm yet wary. This was no lost traveler, no unwitting victim of the forest's tricks. This was someone who sought something. Without hesitation, Sylna stepped into the shadows and let the forest guide her. The trees bent to her will, their branches parting like curtains to reveal the path ahead. The air grew dense as she approached the intruder, her presence cloaked but watchful. In a clearing bathed in the pale light of a waning moon, she saw him, an elf, tall and lean, his leather armor bearing the scars of countless battles. His silver hair, streaked with soot and sweat, clung to his brow. Yet his eyes, sharp as the edge of a blade, betrayed not fear but resolve. He carried no map, no talisman, only an aura of determination that set him apart from the others who had dared to venture here. Sylna stepped forward, her form emerging from the shadows as if conjured by the forest itself. The elf froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of his blade. "This is no place for trespassers," Sylna said, her voice soft, yet imbued with the weight of the forest's authority. "Turn back, elf, before the woods claim you." The elf's hand lingered on his weapon, but he made no move to draw it. I mean no harm, he said, his voice low and steady. I seek the Watchtower. Sylna's eyes narrowed, the glow around her intensifying. And why would you seek that which does not belong to you? For my people, he replied, his gaze unwavering. They suffer beneath an endless frost. Crops fail and children starve. If the Watchtower holds the power to bring spring, then I will claim it no matter the cost. Sylna regarded him in silence, her gaze probing for the truth in his words. She saw no malice in him, no greed or hunger for personal gain. Yet his resolve was dangerous, and the forest would not yield its secrets so easily. You speak boldly for one who knows nothing of the cost you would pay, she said, her tone sharp. The power of the Watchtower is not a gift to be taken. It is a pact, a balance that must be kept. Then let me learn of this balance, the elf said, his voice firm. Let me prove that I am worthy. Sylna hesitated, the weight of the forest's will pressing upon her. She could send him away, let the woods take him as they had taken so many before. Yet something about him, his earnestness, his desperation, stayed her hand. Very well, she said at last. If you truly seek the Watchtower, I will guide you. But know this, the path is treacherous, and the cost of its power is far greater than you imagine. The elf nodded, his expression resolute. I am ready. Sylna turned, her form melding with the shadows once more. Follow me then, rogue elf, and pray the forest finds you worthy. Together, they disappeared into the labyrinth of trees, the whispers of the woods following them like a silent chorus of unseen watchers. The journey through the whispering woods was unlike anything Kael had experienced. The forest seemed to shift and breathe as if alive, rearranging its pathways in response to their presence. The air was thick with an ancient magic that both enchanted and oppressed, a reminder that he was a trespasser in a realm that suffered no intrusions lightly. Sylna moved ahead, her steps so silent it seemed as though the earth welcomed her touch. Kael followed, his every move feeling cumbersome and loud by comparison. The rogue elf was no stranger to danger. He had fought beasts and braved hostile lands, but this forest unnerved him in ways he could not articulate. It was not the threat of predators or the unknown that set his nerves alight, but the feeling of being constantly watched by something far older and far wiser than himself. Sylna paused at a fork in the path, her luminous eyes scanning the shadows. The woods are restless, she murmured, almost to herself. They test you. Kael raised an eyebrow. Test me? For what? To see if you are worthy of the journey, she replied without turning. The Watchtower does not reveal itself to the unworthy. If the forest finds your heart lacking, you will not leave this place. Kael scoffed, though unease coiled in his gut. And what about you? Does the forest test you too? Sylna glanced over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. The forest and I are one. Its will is mine to carry. It does not need to test me, for I am its servant. Her words settled heavily in the air, and Kael decided not to press further. They continued in silence, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and the distant calls of unseen creatures. The first trial came suddenly. The ground beneath them shuddered, and the path was swallowed by a tangle of brambles that sprouted as if from nowhere. The thorns glistened with a silvery sheen, each one razor sharp. "Do not touch them," Sylna warned, her voice calm but firm. "The brambles are cursed. They will draw your strength and leave you an empty husk." Kael eyed the barrier, his mind racing. "There's no way around." "None," she said, studying the brambles. "We must move through them." Kael frowned. "And how do you propose we do that without being torn apart?" Sylna extended a hand, her fingers glowing faintly as she traced a pattern in the air. The brambles responded, parting slightly to create a narrow path. "Follow closely. The path will not hold long." Kael watched her work with a mix of awe and suspicion. The nymph was a creature of the forest, her magic as natural as the breath in her lungs. He wondered what price she paid for such power, or if she even recognized the burden she carried. They moved through the brambles in single file, Sylna's magic holding the cursed thorns at bay. The air grew colder, the oppressive silence broken only by the occasional hiss of the brambles shifting back into place. Kael kept his focus sharp, his hands resting lightly on his twin blades, though he doubted steel would serve him against such magic. When they emerged on the other side, Kael exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Sylna, however, looked unperturbed, her expression calm but distant. "Not all trials will be so simple," she said, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. "Simple?" Kael muttered, shaking his head. "You've an odd sense of the word." The second trial came in the form of illusions. As they walked, the forest began to change around them. The trees shimmered, their trunks shifting to resemble the faces of people Kael had known, friends, enemies, and family long gone. He paused, his breath catching as he saw his mother's face carved into the bark of an ancient oak. "Kael," she whispered, her voice tender and filled with sorrow. "Why do you wander so far from home? Come back to us." Kael staggered, his hand reaching out instinctively before he caught himself. He turned to Sylna, who stood unaffected, her gaze piercing. "Do not listen," she said. "The forest weaves your memories against you. They are shadows, nothing more." Kael clenched his fists, forcing himself to look away from the illusions. The faces shifted, becoming more grotesque, their whispers turning to taunts. His resolve wavered, but Sylna's steady presence anchored him. "Focus," she said sharply. "The forest feeds on doubt. Show none, or it will consume you." When they finally reached a clearing where the forest's magic felt less oppressive, Kael collapsed onto a fallen log, his breath ragged. Sylna remained standing, her gaze scanning the perimeter. "This is no ordinary journey," Kael said after a moment. "Every step feels like the forest is trying to pull me apart." "It is," Sylna replied simply. "But you are still here. That means something." Kael looked up at her, a hint of gratitude softening his features. "Why are you helping me? You could have let the forest take me." Sylna's expression was unreadable. "Perhaps I am curious to see if you can prove the forest wrong." With that, she turned and began walking again, leaving Kael to follow. The Watchtower awaited, but so too did the final and most perilous trials of the forest. The journey through the forest's labyrinth of trials left Kael and Sylna weary, though neither spoke of it aloud. The deeper they ventured, the more the air seemed to hum with an ancient power, heavy with both promise and threat. The path ahead grew narrower, the trees closing in as if attempting to obscure the way forward. Kael felt the weight of the woods pressing down on him, his steps slower, his breaths heavier. Yet, he pressed on, driven by the memory of his people suffering under frost-bitten skies. If the Watchtower held the power to end their torment, he would claim it, even if it cost him everything. Sylna, ever watchful, led the way with an unerring sense of purpose. Her connection to the forest was undeniable, her movements as fluid as the wind that whispered through the trees. Yet Kael noticed something beneath her composure, a flicker of unease that hinted at the toll their journey was taking on her. When the trees parted, they stood before a shimmering veil of light, cascading like a curtain from the sky. Beyond it, the Watchtower loomed, a structure both majestic and foreboding. Its spires seemed to pierce the heavens, their surfaces etched with runes that glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. The tower was surrounded by a garden of eternal spring, vibrant blooms and verdant foliage untouched by the seasons. Kael stepped closer, his breath catching as he took in the sight. "It's real," he murmured. "After all the stories, all the myths, it's real." Sylna's expression was solemn. "The Watchtower is not a relic of myth. It is alive, its magic tied to the very fabric of this forest. But it is not a gift to be taken lightly." Kael turned to her, his resolve unwavering. "Then tell me what I must do." As they passed through the veil, the air shifted. The forest's oppressive energy gave way to a stillness that was almost reverent. The tower's presence was overwhelming, its power radiating in waves that seemed to pulse through the ground. At the heart of the Watchtower, they found a crystalline pool, its waters glowing with a soft golden light. The pool was surrounded by stone pillars, each carved with intricate runes that seemed to ripple and dance in the light. Vines laden with blossoms of every color draped over the edges, their fragrance intoxicating. "This is the source of the Watchtower's power," Sylna said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The pool holds the spirit of renewal. It is the heart of eternal spring." Kael approached the pool, his steps tentative. The light reflected in his eyes, filling him with a strange mixture of awe and trepidation. He reached out, his fingers brushing the water's surface. The moment he touched it, a surge of visions overtook him. He saw the Watchtower's creation, the elves of old forging a pact with the forest's spirit to protect their lands. He saw the cycles of life and death that sustained its power, the delicate balance that could not be broken. And then he saw the price. Kael staggered back, his breath ragged. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "That can't be the only way." Sylna's gaze was steady, though there was a flicker of sadness in her eyes. "The power of the Watchtower is bound by a pact. To grant life, it must take life. The keeper of the tower sustained it, their essence woven into its magic. Without them, the tower would crumble, and its power would be lost." Kael stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "You mean you?" Sylna nodded, her expression calm but resolute. "I have been the keeper for centuries. My life is bound to the Watchtower. If its power is invoked, the balance must be maintained." Kael turned away, his mind racing. He thought of his people, their faces etched with suffering, their lands barren and frozen. He thought of Sylna, her life sacrificed to a duty she had not chosen. The choice before him was clear, but the cost was unbearable. "There must be another way," he said, his voice trembling with desperation. "Something else we can offer." Sylna's voice was soft, almost kind. "The forest does not bargain, Kael. Its magic is absolute." For a moment, the air was heavy with silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on them both. Kael's fists clenched at his sides, his thoughts a whirlwind of guilt and determination. Finally, he turned to Sylna, his eyes blazing with resolve. "If this is the price, then I will not let you pay it alone." Sylna's eyes widened, surprise flickering across her face for the first time. "What are you saying?" Kael stepped forward, his voice steady. "You said the forest demands balance. If one life is not enough, then take mine too. Together, we will share the burden." Sylna opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. She saw the truth in his eyes, the unyielding resolve that matched her own. For the first time, she felt the faintest spark of hope, that perhaps in this rogue elf she had found a kindred spirit. The Watchtower pulsed with light, as if responding to Kael's words. The decision had been made, but the sacrifice had yet to be fulfilled. Together, they would face the final reckoning, bound by a shared purpose and a fate neither could escape. The air within the Watchtower grew heavier, as if the structure itself had drawn a deep, shuddering breath. Kael and Sylna stood before the crystalline pool, its golden light reflecting on their faces. The silence between them stretched, filled with the unspoken weight of what was to come. Sylna broke the stillness first. "The choice has been made," she said softly, her voice steady despite the faint tremor in her hands. "The forest will honor your offer. But know this, Kael, there is no turning back. Once the pact is invoked, your life will no longer be your own." Kael met her gaze, his expression resolute. "If my people can be saved, then my life is a small price to pay." Sylna's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes flickering with something between sorrow and admiration. "You don't understand the full weight of what you're offering. The Watchtower doesn't merely take, it binds. You will become part of it, as I am. Your days, your very essence, will be tied to this place for eternity." "I understand," Kael said, his voice firm, "and I accept." Sylna hesitated, searching his face for any trace of doubt. Finding none, she sighed and stepped toward the pool. She knelt at its edge, her fingertips brushing the water's surface. The runes etched into the pillars flared to life, their light casting shifting patterns across the walls. A low hum resonated through the chamber, the sound of ancient magic awakening. "The pact must be invoked with intention," Sylna said, her voice taking on a ritualistic cadence. "Speak your purpose aloud, Kael. Let the forest hear your resolve." Kael stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked down at the pool, its light seeming to reach out to him, inviting and ominous all at once. He took a deep breath, his voice steady as he spoke. "I invoke the power of the Watchtower to bring eternal spring to my people. I offer my life, my essence, to sustain its magic and uphold its balance." The moment the words left his lips, the light of the pool surged, blinding in its intensity. Kael felt a wave of energy wash over him, searing and cold all at once. His vision blurred, and he stumbled, only to feel Sylna's hand steady him. "It has begun," she said, her voice distant, as though coming from another world. Kael's surroundings dissolved into a cascade of visions. He saw the frost-bitten lands of his people, the frozen fields and withered crops transformed as the magic of the Watchtower spread. The air grew warm, the earth softened, and blossoms erupted in vibrant hues where there had been only snow and ice. He saw the joy and relief on the faces of his kin, their suffering lifted as the land was renewed. But alongside the beauty, he saw something else. The Watchtower itself, pulsing with life, its power fueled by an unbroken cycle of sacrifice. He saw Sylna as she had been centuries ago, her own pact made in desperation, her life given over to sustain the balance. And now he saw himself, standing beside her as the newest keeper of the eternal spring. The visions faded, and Kael found himself back in the chamber. The light of the pool had dimmed to a gentle glow, but the air still thrummed with energy. He looked at Sylna, her expression unreadable, though her eyes shone with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "It is done," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kael felt the truth of her words in his very being. The magic of the Watchtower coursed through him, a part of him now, as much as his own heartbeat. He felt its weight, its power, and its demands. The sacrifice had been made, not just his life, but his freedom. He was no longer Kael, the rogue elf. He was something more, something eternal. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sylna broke the silence, her tone gentler than before. "You have given more than you realize, Kael. Few would have the courage to do what you've done." Kael met her gaze, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I couldn't have done it alone. You showed me the way." Sylna's lips curved into a small, bittersweet smile. "And now, we walk it together." The watchtower pulsed faintly, its runes glowing in a rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat. The garden of eternal spring flourished around them, its blossoms brighter than ever. Beyond the veil, the whispering woods seemed to hum with approval, their ancient magic renewed. Kael and Sylna stood side by side, their lives forever bound to the watchtower and to each other. They were no longer merely guardians, they were its heart, the keepers of a power as old as the forest itself. And so, the watchtower stood as it always had, a beacon of renewal and sacrifice, its secrets guarded by those who had paid its ultimate price. The days after the pact were unlike anything Kael had imagined. The watchtower, once an object of myth and wonder, became an extension of himself. He felt its power in his veins, its hum resonating within him like an ancient song. The weight of eternity pressed upon his soul, yet there was no room for regret. The lands beyond the forest were alive again, the frost banished, and its people thriving. For that, he would bear the burden willingly. The watchtower had not merely accepted him, it had changed him. His senses were sharper, his awareness stretching far beyond the confines of his physical form. He could feel the pulse of the forest, its whispers clearer now than ever before. The trees spoke in secrets, the wind carried stories of the world beyond, and the vines that clung to the tower thrummed with life. Sylna remained his guide, her presence steady and enduring. Yet Kael began to see her in a new light. She was no longer just the forest's guardian. She was a kindred spirit, bound to the same eternal duty. Her quiet strength, her wisdom, her unyielding dedication, these things both humbled and inspired him. "You're adjusting better than I expected," Sylna said one evening, her voice soft as they stood at the tower's peak. The sun dipped low, its golden light filtering through the veil of magic that surrounded the tower. "I didn't have a choice," Kael replied, though his tone carried no bitterness. He leaned on the stone railing, his gaze fixed on the endless expanse of the whispering woods. The forest didn't exactly give me time to second-guess myself. Sylna smiled faintly, a rare expression of warmth. The forest rarely does. It demands what it needs, without mercy. But you've proven yourself stronger than most. Kael turned to her, his expression contemplative. And you? How long have you carried this weight alone? Sylna's gaze shifted to the horizon, her expression distant. Long enough to forget what life outside the Watchtower feels like. I stopped counting the years when they ceased to matter. A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Kael felt a pang of guilt. He had entered her world, upended her solitude, and forced her to share a burden she had borne alone for centuries. Yet in her eyes he saw no resentment, only understanding. The days stretched into weeks, and Kael began to understand the deeper truths of the Watchtower. It was not merely a source of power, but a balance point, a fulcrum upon which the fate of the forest and the lands beyond rested. Its magic was not static. It required constant vigilance, subtle adjustments, and an unyielding commitment to the pact. Sylna guided him through these intricacies with patience and precision. Together, they tended to the garden of eternal spring, ensuring its blooms remained vibrant and its essence undisturbed. They walked the forest's boundaries, their presence a silent assurance to the woods that the pact remained unbroken. Yet, there were moments when Kael felt the pull of his former life. Memories of his kin, his people, flickered through his mind like shadows. He wondered if they remembered him, if they whispered his name in gratitude or mourned his absence. But he never voiced these thoughts, knowing they would serve no purpose. The past was a door he could not reopen. One evening, as the forest bathed in the silver light of the moon, Sylna spoke the words Kael had long been dreading. "You'll see them again, you know." Kael looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" Sylna's gaze was steady, her expression unreadable. "The Watchtower is eternal, but the world beyond is not. Your people's lives will pass, as all lives do. In time, their descendants will forget you. The lands you saved will flourish, but you will be a shadow in their history." Kael's chest tightened, her words cutting deeper than he expected. "And you've lived with that knowledge all this time?" Sylna nodded, her voice gentle. "It is the nature of the pact. We serve the balance, not the world's memory. The Watchtower endures, even if we do not." Despite her words, Kael found solace in their shared purpose. Together, they were no longer just keepers of the Watchtower. They were its heart. Their bond, forged in sacrifice and duty, became a source of strength. They carried the weight of eternity together, their lives intertwined like the roots of the ancient forest they protected. And so, the Watchtower of Eternal Spring remained a beacon in the whispering woods, its light shining for those who dared to seek it. The forest whispered its tales, its secrets known only to the two who stood at its heart, guardians of a power both wondrous and relentless. In time, the world moved on, but the Watchtower stood unchanging, its magic sustained by the pact forged in courage and sacrifice. And in its shadow, Kael and Sylna remained, eternal as the spring they had vowed to protect.